It was a bright, busy morning at the international airport. Sunlight poured through the glass walls. Announcements echoed across the terminal. Passengers moved fast, dragging luggage, chasing time. In the middle of all this, Steven Seagal walked calmly toward the security gate. No bodyguards. No luxury clothes. No special treatment. Just a quiet, confident walk. Airport security stopped him suddenly. Not politely. Not professionally. But aggressively. One officer stepped forward and blocked his path. Another grabbed his documents. Their voices were loud enough for everyone to hear. "Step aside. Who do you think you are? Do not act smart here." People slowed down. Some stopped completely. Phones slowly came out. Steven did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood there calm and silent. That silence annoyed them even more. One guard laughed and said he looked suspicious. Another mocked his appearance. They accused him of wasting their time. The scene felt wrong. Too loud. Too aggressive. Too public. A child tugged his mother's arm and whispered, "Why are they shouting at him?" The officers pushed Steven toward the side lane. They treated him like a threat. Like a nobody. The terminal energy shifted. The air felt heavy. Steven finally spoke. His voice was calm and low. "There is no need for this." That single sentence made them angrier. One officer stepped closer, invading his space. Another signaled for backup. People nearby started murmuring. Some shook their heads. Others kept recording. No one knew that this moment was seconds away from exploding. Because the man they were humiliating was not just a passenger. He was not powerless. He was not afraid. He was Steven Seagal. And the security officers had just crossed a line they could never uncross. Within moments, this quiet morning would turn into chaos. Careers would collapse. Truth would surface. And the entire airport would witness a lesson written in daylight. What happened next shocked everyone watching. And once the truth came out, there was no way to undo it. The morning at the airport continued like any other busy day. Bright daylight streamed through the tall glass walls. The terminal was alive with motion and sound. Flight announcements echoed softly overhead. Wheels of suitcases rolled endlessly across the polished floor. Families hurried toward boarding gates. Business travelers checked their watches with tense faces. Tourists smiled while taking photos near departure signs. Everything felt normal, orderly, controlled, until Steven Seagal stepped fully into the security area. He did not look important to anyone watching. He wore simple jeans, a plain jacket, comfortable shoes worn by someone who traveled often. No assistants followed him. No guards cleared the way. No one announced his arrival. He carried himself with calm discipline, the kind that does not need attention. Steven placed his small bag on the conveyor belt. He handed over his documents without hesitation. His movements were slow and respectful. But the senior security officer did not return that respect. The officer scanned the documents with a bored expression. Then his eyes narrowed. He leaned back in his chair and smirked. He whispered something to another guard. They both laughed quietly. Steven noticed but said nothing. The officer stood up slowly. He stepped in front of Steven, blocking his path. "You need to come with us." Passengers nearby paused. A woman behind Steven tightened her grip on her passport. Steven asked calmly, "Is there a problem?" The officer ignored the question. He waved another guard closer. "Random check." But there was nothing random about it. They pulled Steven's bag aside. They searched it longer than necessary. They spoke loudly on purpose. Their tone carried arrogance, control, enjoyment. Steven waited patiently. He stood still with his hands relaxed. Minutes passed. People began to notice the delay. A line formed behind him. Irritation grew. One traveler muttered, "Why is this taking so long?" The officer finally looked up. He stared directly at Steven. "Where are you flying?" Steven answered calmly. The officer scoffed. "Purpose of travel." Steven answered again. Each question felt less about security, and more about dominance. The officer leaned closer. His voice dropped but stayed sharp. You think staying calm makes you smart? Steven met his eyes without anger, without fear. I think respect makes things easier. That sentence shifted something. The officer stepped back offended. His ego felt challenged. He signaled another guard, this time more forcefully. Passengers began openly watching now. Phones were raised. Whispers spread across the terminal. This feels wrong. They are targeting him. An elderly man shook his head quietly. Steven was asked to step aside again. He complied. He was placed near a secondary screening area, away from the main line, away from fairness. The guards continued questioning him, repeating the same things, prolonging the moment. Steven stayed composed. He understood something important. This was not about rules. This was about power. And power without accountability becomes corruption. The daylight made everything clearer. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was secret. Everyone could see it. The officers believed they were untouchable. They believed the uniform protected them. They believed this quiet man had no voice. They were wrong. Steven looked around the terminal calmly. At the people watching. At the cameras recording. He knew this moment mattered. Not for him, but for everyone who had ever been humiliated quietly. Comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Have you ever been treated unfairly at an airport in broad daylight? The tension continued building. Slowly, unavoidably, and somewhere nearby, a supervisor began walking toward the scene. The calm before chaos was almost over. The atmosphere around the security area began to change. What had started as a routine check now felt tense and uncomfortable. Voices grew sharper. Movements became more aggressive. The senior officer glanced around and noticed the attention. People were watching closely now. Phones were raised openly. The line behind Steven had stopped moving completely. That only irritated him more. He turned back to Steven with a hard stare. You are holding up security. Steven replied calmly. I am only following your instructions. The officer scoffed. Do not act clever with me. He motioned for 2 more guards. They stepped in quickly, forming a loose circle around Steven. The message was clear. Intimidation. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. A mother pulled her child closer. A businessman frowned. Steven remained still. His posture was relaxed but alert. He had seen this behavior before. One guard lifted Steven's bag roughly and dumped its contents onto the table. Clothes fell out. Personal items scattered. There was nothing suspicious. Nothing illegal. The officer pretended to examine each item slowly, dragging out the moment. You travel light for someone who claims to be important. Steven did not respond. The officer laughed. A forced laugh meant to humiliate. You expect us to believe your story. Steven finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. I expect professionalism. That word struck a nerve. The officer's face tightened. He slammed his hand on the table. You do not tell me how to do my job. The sound echoed through the terminal. Conversations stopped. Even the announcement system seemed quieter. People stared openly now. Another guard whispered something into the officer's ear. He nodded slowly. Secondary detention. The words landed heavily. Steven was escorted a few steps away. Not forcefully, but deliberately. The officer raised his voice so others could hear. This man is being uncooperative. A lie. Clear and obvious. A man in the crowd spoke up quietly. He has been calm the whole time. The officer ignored him. Steven looked at the guards surrounding him. He spoke evenly. There is no need to escalate this. The officer smirked. You do not decide that. He stepped closer, invading Steven's space, trying to provoke a reaction. Steven did not flinch. That calm unnerved them. One guard pushed the table aside roughly. Another tightened his grip on Steven's arm. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered. "This is going too far." The officer pointed at Steven. "You think you are above the rules?" Steven met his eyes. "No. I believe the rules apply to everyone." That was the moment the conflict became irreversible. The officer snapped. "Enough." He ordered backup over the radio. His voice was loud and angry. Within seconds, more security personnel arrived. They crowded the area, blocking walkways, stopping passengers. The terminal felt smaller, hotter, claustrophobic. People began complaining loudly. Flights were being delayed. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to frustration. An airport employee approached cautiously. He looked uncertain. "Sir, maybe we should move this along." The officer snapped back. "Stay out of this." Steven watched everything unfold. Still silent. Still composed. He understood something important. This was no longer about him. This was about abuse of authority in daylight. Cameras were everywhere now. The officers noticed too late. A supervisor's voice echoed from behind. "What is going on here?" The officer turned quickly. Sweat on his forehead. "This passenger is causing problems." Steven spoke calmly before the lie could settle. "I have followed every instruction." The supervisor looked at Steven, then at the scattered belongings, then at the watching crowd. Something did not add up. Tension hung in the air. The conflict had reached its peak, and the next decision would change everything. The supervisor stood frozen for a moment. He looked at the guards, then at Steven, then at the crowd that had gathered. The terminal was no longer moving. Passengers were stuck between gates. Security lines were blocked. Announcements echoed unanswered. The senior officer spoke first, trying to regain control. This man refused to cooperate. His voice was loud, too loud, trying to sound confident. The supervisor narrowed his eyes. He had seen this before. Not resistance, but authority misused. Steven calmly raised his hand. Not in protest, but in control. "I have cooperated fully." His voice was steady, clear, unshaken. That calm voice only increased the tension. The senior officer stepped forward again. His patience was gone. "You are not in charge here." He signaled to the guards. They moved closer. Too close. A guard grabbed Steven's arm. Firm. Unnecessary. Gasps filled the air. A woman shouted, "Hey, leave him alone." Another passenger yelled, "This is abuse." The supervisor raised his voice. "That is enough." But the words came too late. The officer had already called for full backup. Sirens did not sound, but footsteps did. More guards flooded the area. Their presence sent panic through the terminal. People backed away. Some pushed toward exits. Others stood frozen. Children cried. An elderly man sat down suddenly, overwhelmed. The terminal turned chaotic. Not violent, but unstable. Airport staff rushed between passengers, trying to calm people, trying to move lines. Flights began delaying. Screens flickered with updates. Gate agents shouted instructions. The officer pointed at Steven. "We are taking him in." The supervisor turned sharply. "For what reason?" The officer hesitated. Just for a second. That second mattered. Steven spoke again. His voice carried through the noise. "There is no threat here." He looked directly at the supervisor. Not pleading. Not demanding. Just truth. The supervisor studied him. Not his clothes. Not his bag. His composure. Something clicked. But the officer felt it slipping. Authority. Control. He raised his voice again, trying to drown everything else. "Clear the area." Guards pushed people back. Phones dropped. Someone shouted that they were live streaming. That word changed everything. Live. The officer froze briefly, then hardened his expression. Too late to stop now. Steven was escorted forward. Not dragged, but pressured. The crowd reacted strongly. Boos, shouts, anger. Let him go. You are wrong. The supervisor stepped between them. His voice firm now. This stops now. The officer snapped back. You are undermining security. The supervisor replied calmly. You are creating a crisis. That sentence cut through the noise. Everyone felt it. The terminal was on edge. One wrong move, one raised hand, and everything would explode. Steven stood still again, centered, grounded. He looked around, at the fear, at the anger. Then he spoke one sentence. This is not how authority works. Silence followed. Brief, heavy. The supervisor took a breath. He raised his radio. Hold all actions. The officer stared at him, stunned. The guards stopped moving, uncertain. Passengers leaned forward, waiting. The chaos paused, like a breath held too long. Then footsteps echoed from the far end of the terminal. Fast, purposeful. Men in formal suits moved through the crowd. Airport executives, operations heads. Their expressions were serious. They were not reacting. They were responding. The supervisor turned toward them. Relief crossed his face. The officer suddenly looked nervous. Steven remained calm, as if he had known this moment would come. The terminal held its breath, because the escalation had reached its limit, and the truth was about to walk into the light. The footsteps grew louder across the terminal. People turned their heads. Whispers spread fast. Men in dark suits moved with purpose, not rushing, not panicking. Airport executives, senior operations officials, legal advisors. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The supervisor straightened immediately. Guards stepped back instinctively. The senior officer felt it. The balance of power changing. One executive stopped in front of Steven. His face changed instantly. Sir, we have been looking for you. The terminal froze. The officer blinked. Confused. Uncertain. Steven nodded calmly. No surprise. No reaction. Another executive spoke. His voice clear and firm. We were informed you arrived early. The supervisor looked between them. Then at Steven. Realization hit him hard. The officer took a step back. His confidence draining. Wait, what is this about? The executive turned slowly. Eyes sharp. This is Steven Seagal. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Phones rose higher. People gasped. The officer swallowed. Sweat visible now. He is a federal security consultant and an international aviation advisor. Silence crashed down. The officer tried to speak, but nothing came out. The supervisor exhaled slowly. Everything made sense. Steven finally spoke. His voice calm, controlled. I was passing through as a civilian. He looked around. At the guards. At the crowd. I wanted to see how people are treated when no one is watching. The words landed heavy. The executive turned to the supervisor. We have received multiple complaints today. The supervisor nodded. Jaw tight. The officer shook his head, trying to recover. There must be a mistake. The executive cut him off. There is no mistake. He gestured to the phones. To the crowd. This is documented. Steven looked at the officer. Not angry. Not satisfied. Just disappointed. You stopped me without cause. You escalated without reason. You humiliated without authority. Each sentence cut deeper. The officer's knees weakened. The supervisor spoke. Voice firm now. Officer, remove your badge. Gasps echoed. The officer stared. Frozen. I said now. Hands trembling. He unclipped his badge. Steven turned away. Not watching. The executive addressed the crowd. We apologize for this incident. This behavior does not represent our standards. People murmured approval. Steven raised his hand gently. No apology is needed for me. He looked at the passengers. But accountability is needed for everyone. The supervisor nodded. An internal investigation will begin immediately. Guards escorted the officer away. No resistance. No shouting. Just silence. The terminal began breathing again. Flights resumed. Lines slowly moved. But no one forgot what they had seen. Steven turned to the supervisor. "I did not come here for recognition." He looked around once more. "I came for the truth." The supervisor lowered his head. "You have it, sir." The terminal slowly returned to motion. Lines began moving again. Announcements resumed. But the energy had changed. People were quieter now. More aware. As if something invisible had shifted. The officer was escorted away through a side corridor. His head was down. His authority gone. Guards who stood moments ago with confidence now avoided eye contact. The supervisor took a deep breath. He turned to Steven. "Sir, I take full responsibility for what happened." Steven looked at him calmly. "Responsibility is shown through action." The supervisor nodded. He understood. He turned to his team. His voice firm. "Professional. All security staff will report for review immediately." Guards straightened. No one argued. An announcement appeared on the screens. Temporary delays due to internal review. Passengers accepted it. No complaints. They had seen why. Airport staff began reorganizing the area. Tables were cleared. Belongings returned. A young guard handed Steven his items. Hands shaking. "I am sorry, sir." Steven accepted them calmly. "Learn from this." That was all he said. The young guard nodded deeply. Ashamed. Grateful. The supervisor walked alongside Steven. As they moved away from the checkpoint. "I have worked here 20 years. I have never seen authority tested like this." Steven stopped briefly. He looked at the supervisor. Authority should welcome testing. They continued walking. Executives followed at a respectful distance. Not crowding. Not directing. The crowd slowly dispersed. But whispers followed. That was him. He stayed calm the whole time. Steven did not react. At a quieter section of the terminal, the supervisor stopped. "Sir, if there is anything we can do." Steven turned. "There is one thing." The supervisor listened closely. "Protect people who have no voice." The supervisor nodded without hesitation. "That will be done." Steven extended his hand. They shook. No cameras. No speeches. Just agreement. Across the terminal, a senior clerk approached the supervisor. "Sir, we have statements from witnesses." The supervisor replied immediately. "Collect everything. Transparency comes first." Steven watched briefly, then turned away. He walked toward the gate area. Alone. Passengers stepped aside respectfully. Not because they were told, but because they understood. A woman whispered. That man taught them a lesson. Steven sat quietly near his gate. Calm. Centered. He closed his eyes briefly. Not tired. Just grounded. Nearby screens displayed updated boarding times. Life moving on. But the system had changed. Behind the scenes, security leadership convened. Emergency meetings. Policy reviews. Immediate suspensions. Not because of his name, but because of the evidence. The supervisor stood in the control office, watching footage replay, frame by frame. He knew careers would end. Others would be reshaped. And it was necessary. Back in the terminal, Steven opened his book, as if nothing had happened. A child across the aisle looked at him curiously. "Mama, why were they shouting at that man?" The mother replied softly. "Because they forgot how to be kind." Steven heard it. He smiled faintly. The boarding call echoed. Passengers lined up. Steven stood calmly. Joined the line like everyone else. No escort. No announcement. Just another traveler. But those who had seen the truth would never forget. Because justice had not arrived loudly. It arrived quietly, through calm, through patience, and through one man who refused to lose dignity. As Steven walked down the jet bridge, the terminal behind him felt different, more careful, more aware. The resolution was complete, not with punishment alone, but with understanding, and the lesson would last far longer than the chaos. The airport returned to its normal rhythm. Flights departed. Announcements echoed. People moved forward. But something had changed. Not on the screens. Not in the schedules. In people. Those who witnessed the incident carried it with them. In silence. In thought. They had seen how power can be misused. And how calm can defeat chaos. Steven Seagal never raised his voice. Never demanded respect. Never revealed who he was. And that was the lesson. True authority does not announce itself. It does not intimidate. It does not humiliate. It observes. It waits. It acts when necessary. The officers believed the uniform gave them control. But control without integrity becomes abuse. They judged by appearance, by silence, by humility. And they failed. Because respect is not a reward for status. It is a responsibility. Every passenger that day learned something. Not from a speech. Not from a punishment. But from behavior. They learned that staying calm is strength. That dignity is power. That silence can be louder than shouting. Steven did not win by force. He won by character. The airport leadership learned a deeper truth. Rules are meaningless without ethics. Authority collapses without accountability. And systems only improve when truth is allowed into daylight. This incident did not go viral because of chaos. It spread because of contrast. Arrogance versus humility. Abuse versus discipline. Noise versus control. In a world where power often shouts, the quiet voice stood tallest. Steven walked away without applause, without recognition. But the impact stayed. Guards would think twice before humiliating someone. Supervisors would listen more carefully. Passengers would speak up. Not because they knew his name, but because they saw what was right. The lesson was simple, but powerful. Treat everyone with respect, especially when you think they are powerless. Because you never know who is watching. And you never know who the person truly is. More importantly, you never know who you are becoming. In moments of unchecked authority, true strength is restraint. True power is fairness. True leadership is accountability. And true respect is shown when no one forces you to show it. That morning at the airport, no punches were thrown. No threats were made. Yet careers ended. Policies changed. And minds opened. All because one man refused to lose his dignity. Backhand index pointing right engagement line. Type respect if you believe character matters more than uniform. And comment your country to show that humility is a global value. This story is not just about Steven Seagal. It is about every person who chooses calm over ego. Because in the end, power fades. Titles change. Uniforms come off. But character remains. And that is what truly defines a person.